It began with an absence. In the quiet, gated community of Great Waters on Lake Oconee, Georgia, Russell and Shirley Dermond were known as dependable, warm, and deeply rooted members of their neighborhood. But in early May of 2014, their absence was louder than their presence. The couple, married for more than 6 decades, had promised to attend a Kentucky Derby party hosted by friends just down the road. It was the kind of small-town gathering they rarely missed. Yet on May 3rd, their seats were empty. Their friends called, but there was no answer. And by the following day, concern began to grow into something darker, a dread that would soon be confirmed. What came next was a discovery so brutal, so inexplicable, that even hardened investigators would call it one of the strangest cases they had ever seen. Russell Dermond, age 88, was found beheaded inside his garage. His head was missing, never recovered. Shirley, his wife of 87 years, was nowhere to be found. But 10 days later, her body surfaced in Lake Oconee, weighed down with cinder blocks. To this day, no one has been charged. No clear suspect has ever been named. And the mystery of who killed the Dermonds and why has haunted Georgia law enforcement for over a decade. The FBI itself would call it one of the strangest murder cases in modern history. This is their story, a story of a couple who live a life of quiet dignity, only to meet a fate of unspeakable violence. A story that leaves behind more questions than answers. Before the horror, there was calm. Russell and Shirley Dermond were the kind of couple you might imagine spending their twilight years exactly as they had hoped, in comfort, in companionship, and in the quiet beauty of Lake Oconee. Russell had once been an executive with Pillsbury, a man known for his discipline, for his careful way of building a life brick by brick. He had worked hard, raised a family, and by the time he retired with Shirley to Georgia, he had earned the luxury of slowing down. He enjoyed golf, reading, and the serene pace of small-town life. Friends said he was polite, thoughtful, always quick with a handshake or a kind word. Shirley, his wife of more than 60 years, was a soft counterbalance. She was described by those who knew her as warm, gracious, and fiercely loyal to her family. Neighbors often saw the couple walking together, always side by side. They were the picture of a partnership that had endured everything life could throw at it, including tragedy. Years earlier, they had lost one of their sons, Mark, to a brutal murder during a drug-related robbery in Atlanta in 2000. Despite the devastation, Russell and Shirley carried on, holding their remaining children and grandchildren close, leaning on each other for strength. It was a loss no parent should ever endure, but together, they had found a way to keep moving forward. By 2014, Russell was 88 years old, Shirley 87. They lived in an elegant lakeside home in the gated Great Waters community of Reynolds at Lake Oconee, a place known for its manicured golf courses, tranquil water views, and sense of safety. This was not a neighborhood where one expected danger to come creeping in. Behind the gates, residents felt protected, insulated from the chaos of the outside world. And that is what makes what happened so chilling. Because of a couple like Russell and Shirley, in a place like Great Waters, could meet such a fate that no one, anywhere, could feel entirely safe. Their disappearance from a simple Kentucky Derby party invitation, a small gathering with friends, was the first ripple in the still water. By the time the ripples reached shore, an entire community would be engulfed in fear, suspicion, and unanswered questions. It began with silence. On May 6, 2014, a neighbor grew uneasy. Russell and Shirley Dermond had not shown up to the Kentucky Derby party the weekend before, an event they were always punctual for, always eager to attend. At first, friends thought little of it. Maybe they weren't feeling well. Maybe they decided to stay in. But as the days passed without a phone call, without a word, the silence became louder. Concern grew until a neighbor decided to check on them. What they found inside the Dermond home would ignite one of the most baffling murder mysteries in recent American history. The house itself was pristine. Nothing was out of place. No windows were broken. No doors appeared forced. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no chaos. At first glance, it looked like the peaceful home of an elderly couple who had simply stepped away. But then, in the garage, the silence was broken. There lay Russell Dermond, sprawled near the car, his body already showing the stillness of death. But the scene was unlike anything investigators had prepared for. Russell had been decapitated. His head was missing. The brutality of it defied explanation. There was no blood spatter, no indication that the murder itself had happened in the garage. It appeared instead that his body had been placed there deliberately, as if someone had staged the scene, leaving behind a message no one could understand. But even more chilling than the discovery of Russell's body was the absence of Shirley. At first, neighbors hoped she might have been elsewhere, at a friend's house, visiting family. Perhaps she had gone to get help. But as officers began their search, the truth became undeniable. Shirley was gone. One half of the couple lay murdered in a grotesque and ritualistic way. The other had vanished without a trace. For the Great Waters community, a place of safety, wealth, and calm, the discovery was shattering. How could something like this have happened inside the gates, behind a guarded entrance, in a home filled not with strangers but with familiarity and trust? The sheriff of Putnam County, Howard Sills, would later call it one of the strangest cases he had ever seen in his decades of law enforcement. Even at the very start, the contradictions were glaring. The house undisturbed. No robbery, no ransacking. And yet, a decapitated man and a missing woman. It was as though someone had entered the Dermonds' quiet life, brought horror with them, and then disappeared, leaving behind only questions. The moment Russell Dermond's body was discovered, investigators knew time was critical. Somewhere out there, Shirley might still be alive. The possibility of a kidnapping added urgency to every decision, every hour ticking by. Search teams combed the wooded areas around Lake Oconee. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning the shoreline. Neighbors were questioned, their homes checked for anything unusual. But there was no trace of Shirley. No note, no ransom demand, no evidence of her leaving the house on her own. The terror within the gated community deepened. If Shirley had been taken, then the killers had breached the very security everyone believed would protect them. Fear spread quickly. Whispers of whether the Dermonds had been targeted or if anyone inside Great Waters could be next. As Sheriff Howard Sills addressed the public, he didn't mince words. This is not a random crime, he said firmly. From the start, he believed the Dermonds had been singled out for reasons unknown. 10 days after Russell's body was found, a fisherman on Lake Oconee made a grim discovery. Floating in the water, miles away from the Dermond home, was the body of 87-year-old Shirley Dermond. Weighted down, her remains had surfaced despite efforts to conceal them. Unlike her husband, Shirley had not been decapitated, but her cause of death was every bit as violent. Blunt force trauma to the head. 2 victims, 2 methods of killing. A single couple murdered in different ways and left in different places. For investigators, the contrast was chilling. It suggested deliberation, not chaos. Someone had taken the time to carry out 2 distinct killings and then attempted to hide one body while leaving the other behind. The discovery of Shirley's body did little to clarify the case. If anything, it raised more questions. Why kill Russell in such a grotesque and symbolic way, while killing Shirley with blunt force? Why leave one body in plain sight, but attempt to sink the other in a lake? And most of all, why target the Dermonds at all? The FBI was brought in. Boats dragged the waters of Lake Oconee for additional evidence. Cadaver dogs searched the surrounding areas. But despite the full force of local and federal law enforcement, no weapon was ever found. No fingerprints, no DNA, no clear trail to follow. For the residents of Putnam County, the horror was now complete. Russell and Shirley Dermond, beloved grandparents, longtime pillars of their community, had been brutally murdered for reasons no one could explain. The safety of the gated walls meant nothing. Evil had walked in freely and left undetected. The case had escalated from strange to utterly confounding. And for investigators, it was becoming clear this was not just a murder. This was a message no one could yet decipher. With both Russell and Shirley confirmed dead, investigators launched a full-scale probe into the couple's final days, searching for any clue that might explain the brutality they suffered. Sheriff Howard Sills described the case as baffling, noting the lack of forced entry, the absence of theft, and the unusual methods of killing. in his decades of experience. He had never seen anything like it. At first glance, robbery seemed plausible. But nothing was missing. Not jewelry, not cash, not electronics. Shirley's purse remained untouched. Russell's wallet and keys were still at the house. If this had been a break-in, the killers had bypassed every item of value. Instead, they had taken lives in a way that defied logic. So detectives began looking inward. They examined the Dermonds' family ties. Could there have been a dispute with their children? Was there a will, a hidden fortune, or long-buried resentment that might explain the murders? Interviews with the family quickly ruled that out. The Dermonds' children were devastated, cooperative, and left without suspicion. From there, speculation turned darker. Some wondered whether Russell's past might have caught up with him. Years earlier, their son Mark had been convicted in a 2000 drug case. He later died tragically in 2005 of a drug overdose. Investigators considered whether those ties might have created dangerous enemies, but the timeline didn't fit. Nearly a decade had passed since Mark's death. Then came whispers of organized crime. The way Russell had been killed, beheaded, his body left in his garage, struck some as ritualistic, even symbolic. Sheriff Sills himself admitted the crime looked like a mob-style execution, though no direct links to organized crime could be uncovered. The Dermonds were not wealthy enough nor connected enough to attract that level of attention, and yet the savagery of the act kept the theory alive. Another avenue led investigators to the lake itself. Lake Oconee was vast, a winding body of water bordered by wealthy homes, secluded woods, and open water routes. Could the killers have come in by boat, bypassing the gated community's checkpoints? That possibility grew stronger after Shirley's body surfaced in the lake. Perhaps the water had been the killer's escape route, allowing them to vanish without ever being spotted. The FBI joined forces with local authorities, conducting underwater searches and forensic testing. Helicopters scanned the shoreline, boats dragged the lakebed, and divers searched the depths. Yet, despite this massive effort, nothing surfaced, no weapon, no bloody clothing, no boat linked to the crime. As months turned into years, theories multiplied. Some believed the Dermonds had been the victims of a targeted killing, a grudge from the past, executed with precision. Others thought it was random, a horrific act by strangers who slipped in and out unnoticed. A few pointed to cult activity, given the almost theatrical brutality of Russell's murder. But the greatest frustration for law enforcement was the silence. No suspects emerged. No one in the Dermonds' life seemed capable of such violence. And with every dead end, the case grew colder. Still, Sheriff Sills remained adamant. This was not random. Someone had singled out Russell and Shirley Dermond. But who and why remained the most haunting mystery of all. The shocking murders of Russell and Shirley Dermond spread beyond the gates of great waters and into national headlines almost overnight. Local television crews camped outside the community. Helicopters flew overhead. And neighbors who had long cherished the privacy of Lake Oconee suddenly found themselves under a spotlight of suspicion and fear. For residents, the sense of safety that had defined great waters evaporated instantly. This was a gated paradise, a place where retirees and families alike believed they were shielded from the chaos of the outside world. Now, with two of their own brutally murdered inside that very sanctuary, the illusion of security was shattered. Neighbors began double-locking their doors, installing new alarm systems, and whispering theories over backyard fences. Reporters fixated on the grisly details. A missing head, a body dumped in the lake, a respected couple murdered without any clear motive. To the press, the case was irresistible. It had the mystery of a locked-room puzzle, the horror of ritualistic killing, and the unsettling notion that anyone, no matter how gentle, how ordinary, how loved, could become the victim of unspeakable violence. Authorities tried to keep the focus on facts, but Sheriff Howard Sills admitted publicly that he was baffled. His statement, calling the crime the strangest case I've ever worked, only added fuel to fire. National networks picked it up, framing the Dermond murders as one of America's most puzzling true crime mysteries. The FBI's involvement gave the story even more gravity. When federal agents joined local deputies in canvassing the area, scouring the lake and interviewing neighbors, it became clear that this was no routine homicide investigation. This was something darker, deeper, and far more elusive. For the Dermonds' children, the media frenzy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it kept the case alive, ensuring their parents' murders weren't forgotten. On the other, it invited constant speculation. Rumors swirled online about possible family disputes, drug connections, or hidden enemies. Strangers on the internet dissected every piece of information, spinning wild theories that only deepened the family's grief. Meanwhile, the community of Great Waters, once a picture of tranquility, became a place where shadows lingered. Residents stopped walking the neighborhood at night. Boaters on Lake Oconee looked at the calm water differently, knowing it had carried Shirley's body. For months, whispers of what if filled conversations. What if the killers were still nearby? What if they had chosen the Dermonds at random? What if they struck again? And yet, despite the fear, there was also a strange fascination. People across the country couldn't stop talking about the case. For many, the story of Russell and Shirley Dermond symbolized the unsettling truth that horror can slip into even the most peaceful of places, leaving behind questions that may never be answered. In the weeks following the discovery of Russell and Shirley Dermond's bodies, tips poured in by the dozens. The Putnam County Sheriff's Office, now working side by side with the FBI, followed every possible lead. And yet, one after another, they collapsed into nothing. At first, investigators wondered whether the murders could have been connected to a robbery. Perhaps intruders had broken into the Dermond home, only to be surprised by the couple inside. But when deputies swept through the house, they found Russell's wallet sitting untouched, with cash still inside. Jewelry sat undisturbed. Electronics were in their places. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing of value was missing. If this had been a robbery, it was the strangest one imaginable. Other leads took them outside Great Waters. Whispers began to spread about possible mob connections, drug trafficking, or even a revenge killing linked to the couple's past. Investigators took these theories seriously. After all, Russell had once owned a successful chain of fast food restaurants. Could someone from his business dealings have held a decades-old grudge? But combing through his financial records and history revealed nothing but a man who had quietly retired to enjoy life with his wife. The discovery of Shirley's body raised another troubling theory. Had someone used the Oconee River as a dumping ground before? Authorities searched records for similar crimes across Georgia, even into neighboring states, looking for patterns. Nothing matched. No one else had been killed, dismembered, or dumped in such a fashion. Detectives turned to the Dermonds' adult children, not as suspects, but as a matter of routine. They asked the hard questions about family arguments, inheritances, and personal struggles. The children were cooperative, devastated, and adamant that their parents had no enemies. Each had an airtight alibi for the days surrounding the murders. Anonymous tips and so-called psychic leads also flooded in. Some callers swore they had seen suspicious strangers near Great Waters in the days before the killings. Others claimed to have heard confessions in faraway bars. Still others spun wild theories involving cults or secret societies. But every credible lead ended in silence. Even forensic evidence provided little clarity. Investigators collected trace evidence from the Dermonds' home, but yielded no usable DNA, no fingerprints that didn't belong. With Russell's head missing, forensic pathologists couldn't even determine his exact cause of death. This absence of detail left the case in a kind of investigative purgatory, too gruesome to dismiss, yet too vague to solve. Months turned into years, and the trail went cold. Sheriff Howard Sills admitted publicly that he had never encountered a case with so few working leads. And each press conference brought the same message. We are working tirelessly, but we need the public's help. As the years passed without answers, one haunting question persisted. How could someone commit such a brutal, meticulous crime in a gated community, and then vanish without leaving a single trace behind? When the evidence runs thin, what remains are theories, fragments of possibility pieced together by law enforcement, journalists, and the public alike. In the case of Russell and Shirley Dermond, those theories are as chilling as the crime itself. One of the earliest possibilities was that Russell and Shirley were the victims of a botched home invasion. Perhaps intruders believed the couple kept money or valuables inside their lakeside home. But investigators quickly dismissed this. Nothing was stolen, no forced entry, and no signs of ransacking. Whoever entered the Dermond home seemed calm, deliberate, not opportunistic. Another theory emerged, a targeted hit. Russell's missing head was particularly disturbing to investigators. Some speculated it could have been taken to hide evidence of the exact weapon used, or prevent a clear determination of cause of death. Others whispered about ritualistic undertones, a killing meant to send a message. Sheriff Sills himself suggested that whoever committed this crime wanted to slow down the investigation, ensuring key forensic details would remain forever unknown. Attention also turned to the Dermonds' family history. Years earlier, their son Mark had been killed in a drug-related crime in Atlanta. Could Russell and Shirley's murders have been some delayed retaliation, a vendetta carried out by those tied to that violent world? Investigators examined the possibility, but found no clear link. By all accounts, Mark's death, while tragic, had been resolved long before, and there was no evidence connecting his killers to what happened on Lake Oconee. Another popular theory revolved around the boating community. With Shirley's body found floating miles away, weighted down before surfacing, some speculated that a boat had been used to transport her. If so, the killer would have needed intimate knowledge of Lake Oconee and its hidden inlets, knowledge more likely belonged to a local than a stranger passing through. This possibility troubled residents of Great Waters. Could the killer have been one of their own? And then came the darker, stranger theories. Some whisper of organized crime, pointing to the precision of Russell's beheading as evidence of professional killers. Others lean into whispers of ritualistic killing, fueled by the sheer brutality and the fact that two victims have been dispatched in separate but deliberate ways. Yet none of these theories have ever been proven. Sheriff Sills has repeatedly described the case as baffling and unlike anything he has encountered in his long career. The FBI echoed those sentiments, labeling it one of the strangest open murder cases in the nation. And so, with each passing year, the speculation deepens. Was it a crime of personal vengeance, carefully plotted and executed? Was it the work of strangers who slipped past the gates of Great Waters unnoticed? Or was it something even more disturbing? A killer who knew Russell and Shirley, who had shared meals with them, smiled at them, and then destroyed their lives in a storm of violence? Years have passed since the murders of Russell and Shirley Dermond, but the case refuses to fade into obscurity. For investigators, neighbors, and family members, the mystery has only grown heavier with time, leaving more questions than answers. From the beginning, Sheriff Howard Sills has led the investigation with a determination bordering on obsession. He has described the crime scene in stark, unflinching terms, calling the most frustrating case of his decades-long career. Despite exhaustive searches, dozens of interviews, and assistance from the FBI, Sills admits the case remains as cold and perplexing today as it was in 2014. The search for Shirley's body alone was an ordeal. Divers scoured Lake Oconee for days, and sonar equipment swept its depths, but the water yielded nothing until two fishermen spotted her floating in a shallow cove, weighed down by cinder blocks. Her body bore no evidence of sexual assault, no robbery, no clear motive. Just a brutal, inexplicable decision to silence a kind-hearted woman. Meanwhile, the hunt for Russell's missing head became symbolic of the larger mystery. Without it, autopsy findings could never fully determine his cause of death. It was as if the killers had deliberately taken the one piece of evidence that could have told investigators the story of his final moments. The head has never been recovered. Over the years, dozens of tips have poured in, each one raising hope, each one fizzling into disappointment. Some claimed to have seen suspicious boats that night. Others pointed fingers at estranged acquaintances, local contractors, or even members of the Dermonds' own social circles. But every lead eventually dissolved under scrutiny. The FBI's involvement added weight, but not clarity. Federal agents reviewed the evidence, brought in advanced forensic tools, and re-interviewed key witnesses. Yet even with national attention, no arrests were made. The crime scene, brutal yet clean, left little behind for science to work with. For the Dermonds' surviving children, the mystery has been agonizing. They've spoken about their parents' generosity and kindness, about the warm memories of lakefront summers forever stained by violence. They've pleaded for answers, for closure, for someone to come forward with the truth. But silence continues to reign. Great Waters, once a haven of tranquility, still carries a shadow of suspicion. Residents remember the fear that followed the discovery. Doors locked earlier, security cameras installed, and whispers lingering at neighborhood gatherings. Who could have done this? Why the Dermonds? And why with such brutality? Every anniversary of the murders, Sheriff Sills renews his vow. He will not retire, he has said, until the case is solved. The FBI still keeps the file open. Somewhere, buried in the evidence or tucked away in someone's guilty conscience, is the key to the truth. And yet, with each year that passes, the odds grow longer. Evidence deteriorates. Memories fade. Witnesses die. And the Dermond case remains what has always been, a chilling riddle without an answer. As we stand at the end of this story, one truth becomes painfully clear. The murders of Russell and Shirley Dermond are not just unsolved, they are unexplainable. In a world where science, forensics, and modern policing can often illuminate the darkest crimes, this one remains stubbornly shrouded in mystery. It is, in every sense of the word, haunting. The brutality of the crime cannot be overstated. An elderly couple, pillars of their community, grandparents adored by family and friends, taken in a manner so violent that investigators themselves admitted they had never seen anything like it. And yet, with all the horror, there was also precision. A crime scene clean enough to leave little behind. A body disposed of in water. A missing head never recovered. Someone did this with calculation. Someone did this and has never been caught. The emotional weight falls heaviest on those left behind. The Dermonds' children, who live every day with the knowledge that their parents' killers are still out there. The neighbors of Great Waters, who cannot escape the feeling that something evil once slipped past their gates and may still linger in memory. And Sheriff Howard Sills, a man seasoned by decades of law enforcement, who had confessed that this single case keeps him awake at night, gnawing at his thoughts, unresolved. When the FBI called this one of the strangest cases they had ever seen, they were not exaggerating. This was not a burglary gone wrong. This was not random violence. Whoever killed Russell and Shirley Dermond acted with a purpose, and that purpose remains unknown. And so we are left with silence. Silence, except for the lapping of Lake Oconee's waters. Silence, except for the questions that will not go away. Why the Dermonds? Why such violence? Why the missing head? In crime stories, we often look for a verdict, a moment where justice is served and the truth is laid bare. But here, the verdict is absence itself. The verdict is a file still open. The verdict is a sheriff still searching. The verdict is a community still haunted. Russell and Shirley Dermond's lives were lives of generosity, of family, of quiet joy by the lake. Their deaths, by contrast, were acts of unspeakable cruelty. That stark contrast between the innocence of their lives and the horror of their end is what makes this story unforgettable. Perhaps one day, someone will talk. Perhaps one day, a piece of evidence will surface, a slip of the tongue, a guilty conscience, and the truth will emerge from the shadows. Until then, the murders of Russell and Shirley Dermond remain one of America's most chilling unsolved mysteries. And as long as that truth remains hidden, Lake Oconee will always carry a whisper of a crime too cruel to forget.